Good. Um, Good evening and welcome to the January 2025 edition of the Poetry Playhouse open mic. And we've been doing these since March of 2020. So we're coming fairly quickly onto our fifth anniversary with the Poetry Playhouse Zooms. Um, we are so happy to have a committed community of poets that we see often and also welcome new folks who are here. And tonight we have two extraordinary poets and teachers who will actually be visiting us this Saturday in person for a workshop. And we're going to start off with Mark Wunderlich, who's the author of four books of poems, the most recent of which is God of Nothingness, published by Grey Wolf Press. And I highly recommend this book. Um, and um, Mark's other books include The Earth Avails, which received the Rilke Prize, Voluntary Servitude, and The Anchorage, which received the Lambda Literary Award. He's the recipient of fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, Civitella Ranieri Foundation, the NEA, the Amy Lowell Trust, and the Wallace Stegner Fellowship Program at Stanford University. He's published poems in the New Yorker, the New York Times Magazine, The Nation, the New Republic, and elsewhere, and is currently executive director of the Bennington Writing Seminar's graduate writing program in Vermont. He lives in the Hudson Valley of New York. So please welcome Mark Wunderlich.
Thank you so much, John. And special thanks also to Jules for this invitation. And to everyone there, I just want to thank you for allowing me to kind of drop in to this beautiful community of poets and writers that you have there in New Mexico. It's the hour is late here in New York, but I'm excited to stay up past my bedtime this once on a school night and and join you here. But I'm also really moved and so pleased to have been invited by Lise Goett to ride shotgun for her book launch. And that's really what these events that we're going to be doing together are in support of. And I'm here to move the product. So this is her most recent book. It's magnificent. There will be links in the chat for how you can order it and buy it. But of course, if you are in Santa Fe or environs, it'll be for sale in the bookstore and there and elsewhere. So I'm so pleased to be joining her and to be able to support this her launch and which she very generously invited me to join. So I'm going to read a few poems and some new ones, and then I'm going to read from the book, and then I'm going to turn it over to the main act here. Um, I'm going to start with just a couple of new things. This summer, I've been trying to be a little less completely controlling and fussy about poems that I'm working on, and by giving myself kind of assignments. And this summer, I was teaching in Provincetown on the Cape, and I would teach in the morning, and then the afternoons, I would go to the beach and I would park there, and then I would walk about 2 miles down the beach to get to the spot where I wanted to be. And I would give myself the assignment of, as I was walking along the beach, I needed to come up with the first line of a poem. And then as I set up, there on the beach, had to write a draft of the poem. So I'm going to begin with one of those. This one, there's a group of these poems, and they're just called Lines Composed at Herring Cove, which is the name of the beach. And in some adventures in genealogy, I discovered that my 14th grade, one of my 14th great grandfathers was Henry VIII's barber and served in the court of Henry VIII. But that also means, interestingly, that there is a portrait of him painted by Hans Holbein. So this is called From the Lines Composed to Herring Cove, 14th Great Grandfather, as painted by Hans Holbein. His nose, pointed and long, juts from the crowd of other barber surgeons painted among the members of his guild. His crest, a crown for his service, crossed combs to signify his trade. King Henry, the record shows, called him Penny, which sounds clubby. Anyone would know his duties trimming curls, lancing the little pearls of boils erupting on the royal ginger-furred ass. Who are we in relation to the past? Who are we to the crowd mobbed on the island of the dead? My own head fills with family faces, their traces writ soundlessly in my flesh, my own owned bones, funny voice, my choice of sweet or sour. Late is the genetic hour. Henry filled the tower with enemies and wives, his power a polished knob of a codpiece, a scepter, and a globe. In the painting, the king is a monument in fur, black-tipped, stinky little weasel tails, choke-hold collar of crenellated lace, scarlet-gartered stockings to show off his shapely calves, of which he was justifiably proud. This sort of power is painfully, perilously loud. And what became of Penny? What was his fate? The record guards its secret of omission, while the painting negotiates his future without evident permission. Um, this is another newish poem I wrote over the summer, and it's called Possession. I own a house and everything in it, own everything on this 4-acre plot of ground. That stinking bird in the chimney, mine. Also, the bottle flies stumbling through the house, bumbling into windows like mimes. I own the water stain, the termite frass, the gutter filled with leaves. Since I own those trees, the rotting leaves are mine too. I own a famous dead poet's coffee grinder, an entire Oktoberfest of ornamental gnomes, a crackling family album of daguerreotypes from 2 centuries ago. Therefore, I own the photos of dead infants in their dwarf coffins. I don't own those relatives' names because I don't know them. I own the windowsill dust, the stovepipe soot, the bat guano littering the stairs. I own the Victorian porcelain receiver full of hair. Technically, I do not own the bear who destroyed my 3 good hives. He's a ward of the state, though the honey he ate is mine, as is his belly full of bees. The bees are mine, not the belly. The smelly mess he left by the elderberry bush, a shitty gift. I suppose that's mine too. I own the stilt grass, the thistles, and their down, the ammonia smell seeping through the attic on hot days, and whatever some old Dutch farmer left buried in the ground and pushed into view by frost. So much gets lost in a busy life, but if it's lost on these 4 acres, it belongs to me. Me, mine, my mess, my hidden treasure, my measure of rock and clay and sand. For now, I own this land, and when I die, who cares? It all goes once and for all. Good luck to you, I'll call as I push off down the river to the sea, where I'll be salt brine or waving green, the sheen on the barnacled hide of a whale. I'll be sand, and then perhaps I'll irritate a clam and become a lacquered pearl. Of his eyes were coral made, opalescent teardrop dangling from an ear. There's nothing in this death that we must fear. This is another newish poem called Lines Composed at Herring Cove. Oh, I refer to Uh, Luchino Visconti's great film of Death in Venice in this. The main character, Aschenbach, who dies in the end. So refer to that. Lines composed at Herring Cove. The dead are so much easier to love. They don't appear uninvited in your yard, ask for favors, get mad. Instead, they are a bit like the seal I barely glimpsed at the beach. No one with me, so mine alone, black head cresting from a wave, and so big I thought it was a serpent or a small whale. But no, just a seal, revealed emerging from its vast, unknowable realm of wet salt, tides, force. My first time in Venice, I hardly ever knew what I was looking at, except for lunch. Sometimes I had an eerie hunch I was being followed as I went up one wet little bridge, then down, taking my slick and clueless walk to some church. Later, I would lie in a humid, narrow bed, my face melting like Visconti's Aschenbach, my mind sketching in the stranger waiting for me next to the green, fetid waterway downstairs. Who cares if ghosts exist? They're still dead. Only our attention keeps them fed. This one doesn't have a title yet, but it'll get one eventually. So, my house is old. In summer, the rising damp encourages the mold that greens my leather shoes. In winter, it's just cold. But now it's spring, and the vultures descend to sink their ugly angel beaks into the possum's flattened head, prizing it from its resting place on Route 385. Its little grease spot ghost is washed off in the rain. All over the county, the bears are waking up. In May, they search out a succulent lunch of fawn paired with a dram of dew licked up from the lawn. Last fall, a big boar, that's a bear, ate a neighbor's miniature donkey. God, hold old Snickers in your giant bloody paws. He was mighty loud, our Snickers, but he had a gentle face. Now it's time for the big race to summer. Willows waxing green, dandelions blow their cover and carpet the yard in worthless sunny gold. This never gets old, or is forever old, this promised resurrection, but not the red state kind. This one's no goth fairy tale with Apostle Thomas fingering the tempting hole in his buddy's sloppy side. This rebirth brings the hungry spring wind to shake the pollen from the buds, sets the phoebes plush and patient upon their nests of mud, sends bees to jitter in the tulip's tannic cup, and sends me to this page to describe it and herewith to bind it up. So since I'm having too good a time with those new poems, I'm gonna turn and just read a couple from the book. A Driftless Sun. It came to me to sell the family farm, shift its failures to a man who planned to occupy the place for recreation, to hunt the deer that spook and shadow in the pines. My job to consign to another my granddad's stunted grove of walnuts planted against the forester's advice with his hired man Tiny, who died by stepping in front of a train, though first he roped his dog Bear to a nearby tree, tacking on a note that read, "Take care off me." Does anyone remember this fat fact? A loaf of toast and a dozen eggs was Tiny's daily breakfast meal. Give it to me. I'll remember that bit too. I fished that muddy pond just once. Its manury slurry slipped downstream from the Tullius brothers' hogs, shot the one buck trophied on my wall whose crippled hoof had slowed him dangerously down. In town again, I pulled the locks off all the doors of the barn. Empty now, October now, the deer not yet come to any harm. So since I'm reading this, in the room that I'm in right now is referred to in this poem, which is called Haunted House. And the house I live in is 300 years old, and it's and this very window that you'll see over here is one in which a figure is sometimes seen. Not that I've ever seen her, but anyway. So she's maybe if there's a looming shape over my shoulder as I read, you'll know who it is. Haunted house. I moved into the haunted house and gutted it to the bones. I wasn't alone then and worked there in a team. We evicted squirrels from their vast nutshell nest, filled dumpsters with 50 years of trash. I found 3 lit and ornamented trees in a pile of brush, uncovered secret drawings in a drawer. We tore up a floor to uncover a floor, sanded tulip poplar to a sheen. I let the others unhouse the rat snake muscled around the boiler pipes downstairs. They took it in a pail to Corlairs Creek, where it braided angrily away. I too slithered in the muddy crawl space, headlamps sputtering with sweat. When the house began to wake, the strangers began to arrive, driving their cars up our long drive to have a proper snoop. Uninvited, they told of Dutch Mary rocking in her scarf, dead slaves buried in a hollow up the hill, the wellhead by the Indian trail where carriages stopped to let their long dead horses have a drink. If you think this scared me, you'd be wrong. I know a story meant to frighten when I hear one. Now I live here alone with the spirits I cannot see. I spend my days inside these rubble stone walls, cooking small meals and stoking logs into a smoking stove, while around me history stills to pictures in a frame, the same clouded view for old Dutch Mary waiting at the window once again. Shanty. No one remembers what became of the people in the house now sway-backed in the marsh, not the mice whispering and tunneled in the couch, not the snapping turtle armored on a log, retracting his hard beak into wrinkled folds like foreskin, not my mother who visited the shanty once as a nurse, noting the packed dirt floor, the walls pasted up in newsprint. They burnt waste oil in a barrel stove they got free from a garage, dipped their water from a spring now greened with cress. Artist Kyle Holtz knew something of the wife, but couldn't think what was she called to home. When I was small, I heard roosters crowing from their yard and think I rode a school bus with the girl, but now I couldn't say for sure. Bill Went taught me to trap muskrats in that swamp, staking a conibear in the muddy muskrat runs with brush. I pulled their plush-furred bodies from the ice, sold them for cash money to the fur man in the spring. How long will I keep telling stories just like this? Dirt floors and trap lines and a shack abandoned in a swamp. The vividness of that world is fading like my father's addled mind. Poverty is not poetry. This I know. But these pictures are what's left of childhood, and now all my male relatives are gone, though lost and half remembering my father living on. And I'll just read one more. To whom it may concern. In the Polaroid in the drawer of the house the other relatives picked over, I'm the blur in the background. mop of silvery hair. The rasp of the ashpan when you empty the stove is a bit like my voice stuck in the chimney like a nest. You won't have known how I procrastinated of my abiding fear of snakes, or how I gave terrible presents when I bothered to give them at all. I was told by a psychic to remember the unloved dead, and so I did, but not in a way they would like, recalling how they got ugly when they drank, or stole the loose change from the laundry when they thought nobody saw. I spent years writing my last letters, writing off the debt of a cold bed, pretending I was busy when really I was home, pinned to the couch by a cat. For money, I did many things, trapped muskrats, forged thank you notes, let men pet me while I danced. Mostly, I played the role of someone who cared, tilted in my chair and trying to appear engaged, the preoccupied uncle you weren't quite sure you liked. That's me smoking in the Winnebago, leaving the sink clean of hair. I'm there deadheading the rhubarb nobody bothers to pick, and my worthless collections, rag rugs, concrete gnomes, were most likely put out in the trash. Sometimes I lied when I was bored. I wanted you to know what I knew, though I eventually gave that up, preferring to make you laugh. This life I led was mostly private, and hours were spent sweeping bat guano from a crumbling set of stairs. Nobody knew the half of it, and nobody seemed to care. I foresaw how neglected the town cemetery became, glimpsed in a vision the rusted fence that let in the deer. They stripped the bark from the junipers that eventually came down in a storm. I was in that storm, blown out across the ice toward Arcadia. That's a town in Wisconsin and not some name for paradise. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was delightful. Thank you. By the way, I did not catch a glimpse of Dutch Mary, but maybe some of our audience members might have been more. Yes. Well, now maybe. Thanks so much. Um, so we'll have a conversation uh, with Mark and Lisa in a little bit. But first, as Mark mentioned, we're here celebrating a new book by Lisa Goett, The Radiant. And I want to just say a couple of words about Lisa. She has she lives up in Taos, New Mexico, and has garnered numerous prizes, including the 2012 winner of the Robert H. Winter Memorial Award in Poetry from the Poetry Society of America, um, the Paris Review Discovery Award, the Penn Southwest Book Award in Poetry, and the Barnard New Women Poets Prize for her first collection, Waiting for the Paraclete, Beacon Press, 2002. More recently, the Palette Journal Spotlight Prize and a grant from New Mexico Writers for The Radiant. Her poetry has appeared in numerous journals, including the Paris Review, Plowshares, Mandorla, Lana Turner Journal, and the Antioch Review. She holds a BA in English from the University of Iowa, an MA in English Literature and Creative Writing from NYU, and an MFA from the Writing Division of Columbia University. So please welcome Lise Goett. And you need to unmute, Lisa.
All right. There you go. Thank you, John, and thank you, Jules. I've been talking with Mark recently about community and how important community is to us. Catherine Strisick, who is here in the audience, and I met 42 years ago in Lake Tahoe at the Community of Writers. And so many of those people that I met there at that conference are still my friends today. And I don't think that I could have made it through the pandemic without the community of poets, many of them who are here this evening, who have participated in the marathons that I lead. It gave me uh, a, a community with whom I could sustain conversation even during lockdown. So I'm very grateful to every one of you for being here tonight. I'm going to begin with a couple of poems that were published by Christopher Nelson in under a warm green linden. And so if if you haven't read his work, his personal work, it's just extraordinary. And his press is also a gem. So I invite you all to visit uh, Green Linden Press. This first poem, called Difficult Body, is named after a poem that Mark himself wrote. And this is my rendition of what it means to live in a difficult body. There is a time in the mind when the soul slips from its cerement and goes to live like a fruit bat in the rafters, flying through the ether like no real bird, knowing no bounds, and, fey little wanderer that it is, watches from above, as in a surgical theater, the bodies of all things born into this world under a sign of error, of negation, as they are being erased. Inhibited in their aims, the emotional impulses torque into aberration, divide and multiply like cells seeking a new host. You could be 18 again, watching your stand in, your stunt double, a sherbet Frankenstein in waitress uniform, serving pancakes and pots of hot coffee, smiling for the customer. But inside, you burned like a fire shut in stone. How could you help but become magma, enigma? When did it come, the split, the others? The voice asking, what of your shining body revealed? It was only a matter of time before your psyche separated from the body like a blister. It is then that the soul returned to the heyday of childhood, its boneyard of linoleum speckled like an oyster catcher's egg, that reliquary of slide rules and dead languages, pink sugar cubes soaked in vaccine, Our Lady of Good Counsel, where the hard discipline of the sisters tried to forge you into God's marine. You clapped erasers and cleaned chalkboards, incensed yourself in the ambergris of chalk, and a talcum of smoke cocooned you, thought, in a happy childhood, until you were told that you don't remember. It hadn't happened yet. The disasters fall out like manna or ground pumice or gray flotsam. You simply practiced the drills, filing past the glass wax stencils of snowflakes and bulletin boards, drinking the milk of amnesia, crouching under wooden desks, memorizing the cadence of your own diaphragm rising and falling, anklets neatly tucked under the buttocks, back curled like unshelled shrimp, all that abundance of pink flesh, pre-sexual, so vulnerable that the predator wanted to mar it, gelid and available, steal its energy, capture it for his own private use, the soul's little light doused out for the air raid. Chris also published this poem. It's called Festina Lente, and it's after Susan Stewart. It is in it's a modified pantoum. It has 5 lines instead of 4-line stanzas. You must lie down now, for it is you who are vanishing, not the forest. It will remain here long after you're gone. Festina lente, hurry slowly, as if stalking a hen, one you might catch from behind and hold tightly. Or it will run, thinking you a wolf and not to be returned home to the coop, the hen startled to find herself alive. You should sit down now, for it is you who are vanishing, at the writing desk set with your mother's brass candlesticks. Festina lente, hurry slowly, as if stalking a hen. Take in everything as if for the last time, your smell heightened, for it is the sense of things invisible approaching, come to inhabit you for a time. Returned home to the coop, the hen startled to find herself alive in spite of disfigurement, the halo of innocence that scourged you still shining. At the writing desk, set with your mother's brass candlesticks, you will find yourself, not the life you imagined, but the beauty that lived you. Skin powdered white with ashes cupped in a gold compact of things invisible approaching, come to inhabit you for a time. The yes and the no, the gurry and the gambol, held equally, in spite of disfigurement, the halo of innocence that scourged you still shining. You should lie down now, in a field of narcissus, a queen of Hades, your bodice left open for the dead, skin powdered white with ashes cupped in a gold compact, their mysterium strangering in you, impregnating you for a time, the yes and the no, the gurry and the gambol, held equally, as if you yourself were the only one who really knew how to hold you. The truth of life always seen in arrears, in dusk's flat light, a queen of Hades, your bodice left open for the dead, you who suckle a blue runnel from your breast, their colostrum, their mysterium strangering in you, impregnating you for a time, startled to return home to the coop, still alive in the quickening. Going to read now a poem that is from my college years, not written, but about my college years. Sinistra. It is just a Thursday night in the flatlands of America. He sits down and orders an old-fashioned clam rolls, all you can eat. He tells the waitress that his brother owns a restaurant in West Liberty. The brother's hiring. He says that he wants to talk about it more, but in another place, not this Hojo's. He'll wait for her until her end of shift. He'll take her in his semi to the bar across the interstate. His cab is warm and the engine never stops running. He worries the cherry in his drink. He glances at her hands, not the hands of a man in a clean business. Black crescents of motor oil beneath his nails. She meets him in the hallway outside the restaurant where some turn left, some right. Such a simple decision, which way to go. He tells her she needs to go with him. The sun is still out. It's summer. She vacates her body. Her TV doppelganger tells him politely that she will drive in her own car. She crosses the interstate and waits, but he never shows. A light dusting of leaves on the pavement, a preternatural fall before true autumn, the hard, rutted ground with its cropped stubble where he might have thrown her down. But he's long gone. His semi skims the highways, the susurrus of tires on wet pavement. For years it haunts her as she passes every boarded up facade in every dying town where there's nowhere to go, nor even for not even for a spot of coffee. It haunts her, the missing eye of that derelict bar 2 towns over, gutted out, dead, alive. It's where she might have worked had she turned left instead of right. Sophia. Every year at this time, the mythic children's theater Wonder Float appears in a one-street parade, wending past the Mercantile with its carousel of bird's eye maple pipes, eau de jaunite, and rack of BB guns. Behind the VFW's khaki brigade withering in the noonday heat, and a convoy of gull wings and skylarks, cars that go up and down on double helix hydraulic hoists, past the derelict bar still boarded up like a one-eyed dog with its face agape. It's where you might have worked had you been born into a different life, born into a different life to different parents. You might have toiled in the dark. That gutted building haunts you, that missing eye, the corridor where the man with dirty hands almost raped. Your gaze constricted now by a 10-year-old nereid, flanked by a pair of nubile satyrs. She is luminous in her visitation, anchoring her stillness in the sun, swathed in scarves of glint. Maven of the dead, summer's retinue calls you. Early girls, better boys, sweet 100s, dryads and nymphs, braceleted with hex beads. Have you forgotten in this desert at 8,000 feet the farmers' markets and a farm boy's kiss, sea mandalas, or the way the light strikes the breaking wave, the breaking light of you, this season gold flecked like that fabled winged ram sired by Poseidon, born of Helios. Summer summons you, child of Cassandra, dressed as summer or the sea. Will you come dressed as a field of lavender or stark winter in her frozen sleeve. The wave thins to sheer mirror. You are ether and air and blue light. In this vortex of wave, you think that you yourself become spindrift and peak, become transparent as these spirits of the sea, phosphorescent with dripping luminosity. I'm going to end with a rather long poem, and it's the last poem in the book, and it has Mark in it, so I thought I'd read it. The Bookman. It is Easter Sunday, circa 1999, and snowing, a freak storm to be sure, in Tucson, where it never snows, where the only sure wet comes in August after a dry heat. Sky bent like the upper and lower limbs of a bow pinned back at full draw, then let loose, snatching up a white mop of lasso apso in an instant. The dog, the day, swept away from its original intent of hosannas, buoyed by deluge and then dropped unceremoniously into what is. This is history. The first time snow has fallen on Easter in a century, sifting above a makeshift lean-to, roofed but open to a brick of baked caliche in Alden's backyard. Hypnotized by great flakes, pillowy tufts of white catching in the erect spines of agave, falling even closer than disaster. At the moment it unhinges, we watch the crocheted lace of it fall, trace asymmetrical knots in a pine wood table, and await Alden's pies. Alden has promised to bake 20 of them, but 20 has morphed into 2, an apple and a berry, and a bottle of 80 proof. Everyone gently tipsy, feeling the swirl of the pillowy tufts, a gentle unmooring, not yet powerful enough to sweep us off our feet, our toes still gripping the bottom of existence. Perhaps there was also a ham, perhaps Mark, perhaps Christine, perhaps Francis were also there. Perhaps memory is a fiction. I can't remember, perhaps. If you wind the reel back, there was still time. Perhaps you can remember the time called before. Before the all you can do is see yourself in a split second, where you know, where you recognize that everything you've ever known before is going to be different after. Transfixed as you are, suspended in watching white flurries, waiting for pie in the promised land. Alden Borders' promised land of 20 pies. This is years before I let go of everything I love. The dog, the house, the agave, the table, before cancer takes Alden with the quickness of a flash flood, before I insist that my mother eat the host I have carried home in a gold pyx. What am I to do with it if you refuse? I say. I want to know where to find you after you're dead. I was so certain. It was my tragic flaw. as if my own soul's status were not in question, as if one were ever in a position to judge one's own profligacy or faith. I can't force her to take the Eucharist against her will, but I do. I take her free will away. I force her. And the day settles into what is, and she's gone, as in a child's cartoon. Bang, bang, dead. Giant flakes as big as hands, falling even slower than disaster. The swirl of it at that moment, as that moment unhinges. Where are they? In California, my parents are getting ready for bed, quail sifting secretly through the new riots of mustard, gold after the rains, all of it yellowing into a sautern end of day. My dutiful father, already dressed for bed, sets out the recycling bin for the Monday morning pickup, as he always does every Sunday night, under the red pepper tree, its shower of pink peppercorns, as we await pie, the scent of the Easter pies baking. Alden is a bookman. The gift of a great bookman lies in his ability to pick out the right book for anyone. One can walk into a store and say, I want a book for my uncle, and he will come up with a perfect answer, debase the evidential power of beauty, or barks a lover's discourse. It's like a seance, his accuracy, the bullseye of a great marksman, clairvoyant. Having never driven a car where it never snows, Alden knows life's all about slow drift. What counts is not how fast you arrive, but the weight of what you carry with you. My father faints at the top of the driveway. The neighbors call 911 without telling my mother, who doesn't know that the paramedics are on their way. She's washing dishes while smoking a cigarette and peers out the window just in time to catch the cherry red flash of a fire truck. The paramedics dragging my father off to the hospital. She dons my father's gardening shoes, runs out the front door, and trips, falling on the hard macadam of the driveway, breaking her hip and her wrist. And finally, she says to my father those words he's been waiting to hear all his life. Harry, Harry, what would I do without you? You were the great love of my life. And they ride in the ambulance to the hospital hand in hand. This the denouement of a great love story. My mother in her bathrobe, the plush blue one with its elbows worn to mesh. It bears the history of a long marriage. Its cigarette burns and sewing needles and safety pins tucked into the lapel, threadbare but faithful. Parts of it worn away into vanishing, as she will. The stone has rolled away from the tomb. A marriage far removed from its wedding day. Marriage itself falling away from its original intention, like this day with its pie. When Alden was pronounced dead, Christine called to tell me that Alden had regretted our last meeting. It was fine, I said, but Alden must have told Christine something different, a piece of gossip that I'll never hear. Oh, honey, he'd say, He always called me honey. You're just going through a hard patch. But we didn't fall out, I said. Why do I always think of the famed Phantom Palace of Paris when I think of Alden? I don't know, but Alden was like that. He could make you imagine a world polished into a high crystal gloss, not separate from snow, Hopkins lovely asunder, all white out and drift, the spirit spangled in the updraft and skein of a whoosh swept skyward into attraction. The flash of it, this astonishing. Alden looked at me with those hazel brown eyes of his, and that eye of the partridge sheen he gave off. The way everything shimmering refracts light just before it enters the tunnel, to meet the light on the other side. Traveling at the utmost speed one can manage, slipping under the mesmer of peridot lights and bateau mouche on the water, the reflecting pools of fountains at Trocadero, a moment a photon in squall, entering that quick and native light. And for the last time, I ask Alden to name the perfect book for me, expecting he'll say something like Pedro Paramo or The Joy of Man's Desiring. But no, he must know. He must be able to feel the tension, like the limb tips of a bow pulled back at full draw. And he holds my face between his palms and says, how to pack a suitcase. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. So such a rich swirl of hauntings and memories and imaginations. And the new book is called The Radiant, and there is information about it in the chat, I'm sure. I was wondering if everybody could unmute for a second. Can we just get a little round of applause before we move to discussion? So, if you would, yeah. Terrific readers, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm going to, yeah, put the gallery around so I can see folks. Um, um, uh, there we go. Lisa and Mark, as I understand it, is it true that Lisa, you were Mark's first poetry teacher or one of the first poetry teachers? Is that correct? How did that happen?
Mark, you want to tell the story?
Well, sure. Indeed, Lisa was my very first poetry teacher. I was not like a precocious child writing poems to please my parents. Had I done that, they wouldn't have noticed. Um, and I was actually a German major at the University of Wisconsin. And I had thought that this was in the 1980s, the late 1980s, and if you were studying German or Russian at a place like the University of Wisconsin, you were recruited by military intelligence. And so they had programs where they offered to pay for your education and following your time there, as someone who was studying German, they then said, then we would start you on Russian at the time that you graduated. We send you to the language schools in San Diego, and you know, um, and and I thought I was going to be a spy. So that was my career plan. And
Well,
but
oh, it's kind of like a spy,
Yeah, you're kind of a spy.
a bit. And but then I registered. I needed an English credit, and I this was when you used to run around to the buildings, and you used to have to sign up, like actually write your name on the chalkboard underneath the course number. And I was planning to take Chaucer, which seemed like a sensible English credit. And I had signed up in the line in the column next to it, which was creative writing one, like 102 or whatever it was. And that's what I signed up for. And then I got my card, my registration card in the mail, and learned that I was taking this creative writing.
Uh,
And so I thought, well, it's easier to just go than it is to, you know,
yeah.
change it. So I went to class, and there were 15 of us, I think, something like that, sitting around the table. And the teacher was late. And we heard a sound, a very unfamiliar sound in 1988 in Madison, Wisconsin, coming down the hall. And I realized that the sound, as soon as I saw the person who walked into the room, that the sound was high heels. Uh, and, the shuffle of Birkenstocks was a much more familiar sound to us at that point. But Lisa came into the room, and she was wearing all purple, and um and including how it was January. In fact, it was really maybe about a week ago, Lisa. It was 36 years ago because I met you in January. And
Nobody wears high heels in Wisconsin in January.
no, and except Lisa, who came into class and distributed a poem that she wanted us all to read and talk about, and it was The Snowman by Wallace Stevens,
Ah,
and which we had to memorize. Um, and one must have a mind of winter to regard the frost in the boughs of the pine trees crusted with snow, and have been cold a long time to behold the spruces rough in the distant glitter of the January sun, etc. I still know it.
Mhm.
And we had a conversation about that poem. And I realized at that moment that this was the conversation I wanted to have for the rest of my life.
Wow.
mm,
There was something about it that was so thrilling to me. And it was presented by Lisa with this, with the same kind of, not with any answers, that the poem was presented as a place not of answers, but of questions, and
Mhm.
that the poem itself was the vehicle through which those questions were asked of the world.
Mhm.
And it felt like we were, of course, talking about this document that was in front of us, this literary artifact, but we were also talking about something bigger,
Mhm.
something about a world that lies beyond this world, or a life that was larger than one I had considered. And that was it. From that point on, I stuck to Lisa Goett like a tick. I'm at the University of Wisconsin, and that was
Yeah.
um and tried to figure out how to make this part
Mhm.
of my life, and she shepherded me from those very early times. So I was 19, I think, when we met, and I'm very far from 19 now.
Well, the precision of your memory of that first encounter is testament to how powerful, emotionally, how life-changing it must have been. Yeah.
Yeah, it was completely indelible, the whole experience. I mean, it was yeah, something changed in that moment. Like, we are changed by our teachers. The
mhm,
best teachers change us forever.
mhm.
And Lisa, of course, is an extraordinary teacher.
Mhm.
Indeed, she is.
Jules, do you have a?
Right. And I love that because poetry changes you. And talk a little bit about the sublime. I know you're doing the class on rendering the sublime, but it sounds like that's also the theme of your work. Or maybe also I wanted to ask like how this whole book came about, but how do you, what's that conversation between the two of you about sublime?
Mhm.
Mark, you're so much better at answering questions than I am.
Oh, you take this one. I'll chime in, but you take.
Okay. Uh, the the sublime, I believe, is a beyonding. It's an encounter with
The symbol.
something beyond oneself that one can't quite
Mhm.
ever um paraphrase
Mhm.
or even describe. And I think poems are sometimes an encounter with uh, that extraordinary beyonding that changes us for life.
Mm.
And especially, and Mark, we're so lucky to have Mark because he's an expert in Rilke, who more than Rilke is uh, an exemplar of poetry of the sublime.
Mhm.
And for in the Duino elegies, I believe it's the agonistic sublime. There's a taste of terror and awe in the sublime and in approaching that circle of dread that encompasses Godhead. And so there are many kinds of sublime, from Whitman to John Ashbery, and on Saturday we'll do a little rundown. But what's extraordinary is that Mark's an expert on Paul Celan, Emily Dickinson, and um, and Rilke,
Mhm.
among others. And that's really going to be exciting, I think, to examine these the sublime in those three poets, because Salon goes, especially at the end of his life, towards a kind of poem that's very hermetic, and but is very, I think, he's he goes from being, I think, believing in God to uh, being an atheist, and he speaks to the no one, and before walking into the Seine. So that's uh, the trajectory that we'll be following on.
In your book, Lisa, well, you call it the radiant.
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
So, I mean, that's, part of that lightness or a little bit of the sublime or anything. I guess you want to talk about why you chose that as a title or how the title came about?
The radiant is what is the word or the term for that point in the sky where meteor from which meteors appear seem to be falling.
Mhm.
And so I felt that so many of us have a trajectory that are like luminous and are radiant and maybe extremely fraught with pain, but also epiphany,
Mhm.
and that we are so lucky to um, cross paths with one another. There's a prayer to Saint Raphael, who where one asks to meet the people one is looking for, and that those people be looking for us. And so I'm just looking out at the people who are here, and I feel um, that my life has meaning because I have crossed paths with so many people who are here tonight.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you. Um, we're going to have to wrap up the conversation soon. Mark, did you have any thoughts on from what Lisa was saying about the radiant or the haunting or the sublime?
Sure, I mean, one of the things that I think, is a characteristic of the sublime, as Lisa said, is that it's a sort of combination of awe and terror, right? And that it's often in the face of tremendous beauty, right? The sublime is not encountered in a meadow, it's encountered at the ocean or on a mountain, you know? And that's like
The edge of
that
a volcano.
right? And it was really like this was a word like the sublime was this, the romantics were very interested in this because it also represents a kind of place where we move from the rational to the irrational. We move from a place where we can kind of think through something to the place where thinking stops and feeling has to come forward. It's a sort of hinge that happens. There's a show that's going to be coming to the Metropolitan Museum in February of Caspar David Friedrich, of the um, great German painter of landscapes of the Romantic era, the famous Wanderer painting where he's standing on this cliff in the mountains. You see the back of him there, just on the edge of being kitsch. I mean, there is that like just that quality of him, and yet there's also this exquisiteness of those. I think of that as really being in painting after painting, he was trying to kind of capture these encounters with that moment where where awe, where fear, where you're captivated by the beauty of something, but you are also it's terrible as well, right? Rilke writes famously in the Duino Elegies, he writes it twice, slightly different each time, but jeder Engel ist schrecklich. Every angel is terrible. And the angels are these creatures, these images he uses in the Duino Elegies as emblems of a between space, of something that can move between known and unknown world, between the living and the dead. And so he is invoking that. And Rilke is this poet who lives between these two spaces, between the romantic and the modern. And the Duino Elegies is this move from romanticism to modernism. And it took him over 10 years to complete those 10 poems. And there's a period of silence that exists in the middle. And it took me a long time to figure out what that was. It was a world war. Silence that existed in those poems, right? That is it. They contain a whole world war. So they're begun in a time of a kind of hopefulness, even, and they're completed after this inevitable discussion. Anyway, I can talk on and on about the
All
sublime.
right.
Our time
I
is
look forward to Saturday and continue the conversation. Well, thank you. And um, I would take questions from the audience, but we're getting really low on time, Jules, I think. So
Yeah, we're fine. And for our people on the recording, if you go to poetryplayhouse.com, there's info on the events in there. And then hopefully I'm going to be rewatching this recording myself.
yes,
Thank you again,
thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Lisa
you.
and Mark. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
And I need to, there we go.
A lot